Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David Griscom here, as always, joined by Matt Leck. And this week, we're really excited to be joined by Liza Featherstone, a columnist at Jacobin magazine, contributing writer at The Nation, and author of the really great book, Divining Desire, Focus Groups in the Culture of Consultation. Liza, thank you so much for hanging out with us this afternoon.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, there's so much to talk about. I mean, this has been a very funny news day, but we wanted to zoom out a little bit because you wrote a really great piece in the New York Times about a subject, that I think is important to this project here at Left Reckoning, but also a lot of the kind of work that we're doing at TMBS. The piece is called Josh Hawley and the Republican Obsession with Manliness. And we're seeing, especially in right-wing politics, there's so much anxiety about men and masculinity and this kind of shift in our culture. I think your piece sort of did a good job analyzing it. But just to start us off, why do you think there is so much anxiety around masculinity, not just with the right, but I guess maybe in general in American culture right now?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons for that. It's certainly a continuity. We always, we always have cultural anxieties about masculinity. Basically for as long as we've even named gender and gender roles, there's been anxiety about the masculine side of it, but I think that it's a particular flashpoint now for a couple of reasons. One is for decades, men have been losing privilege in the society in a couple of ways. One is and some of these are due to social progress, and some of these are due to assault by capital that affects everybody, but affects men in a couple specific ways. So the part that is due to progress is that due to some feminist advances, men are losing privilege at home and in personal relationships. They're not, they're not automatically the boss of a heterosexual relationship or a nuclear family. That's obviously, to those of us who are feminists, that's good in the larger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for those of us who are, who were ever children, thinking back on it, it's good. We don't want to live in the patriarchal world. The other piece of it is that that as part of capital's all around assault on ordinary people over the last few decades, the men bear a particular brunt of that, as men have lost out on manufacturing jobs, which once gave many men decent wages, but also allowed men to make things. There's sort of there's a real concrete pride that a lot of people took in making things that everyone could see and use. And also a sense of really contributing to thriving and prosperous communities, as those jobs have disappeared, a lot of not only survival has men have been left grappling for survival, but also for that sense of purpose and that sense of a clear place in society, as well as for that clear sense of how to support families and how to have a role as a breadwinner. And then there's also the larger questions as our culture evolves, in not only in feminist ways, but also in ways where we're kind of questioning gender, all of which I think is good, but that accentuates the feeling for men that they don't necessarily know what they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to be, and for many men this can feel like an added like kind of assault on their identity. And so what I'd say is it's like some of this is coming from changes that we on the left would consider good, and some of this is coming from changes that we on the left can all agree are not good, like the general assault on ordinary people.
Yeah, and I mean, and a little bit later we're going to talk about how sort of the left can sort of address this anxiety. But, the thing is with the right wing, and in a minute we'll play some clips of Halley specifically, but the thing is for the right is that like getting worked up about masculinity, or like it's crisis of masculinity, men aren't men anymore. It's not a particularly new thing, as you noted earlier, but for the right, it's like an answer that is sort of like waiting for a question, if that makes sense. Like they can sort of provide it, like men are no longer manly today, and that's why you're feeling so lost, and that's why it's hard to find a job, right? You're not strong enough, you can't buck up.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would have to, I'm curious what you think about this, because even though this is a kind of older trope, and I know Matt knows, a lot about Teddy Roosevelt on this kind of thing. This is an older trope for the right wing. But it does seem like it's really bubbled up over the past couple of years.
Absolutely, and globally so.
I mean, that's an interesting point too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we see all over the world, in Brazil, Bolsonaro.
Somebody who I've never seen more pictures of somebody at death's door, by the way, sort of trying to be this international symbol of like male virility or something like this. Very funny to me.
I know. Well, same with Trump. I mean, he was exactly. he almost died of the coronavirus that he was too much for a man to wear a mask against. I mean, this stuff is dangerous. But yeah, so we see it as really a global phenomenon, because the things that I'm describing are in no way unique to the United States. I mean, both like the assault on ordinary people's ability to be the breadwinner of their houses, of their households, but then also the sort of sense of social progress that questions male privilege and masculinity, and those things are, those things are global, and that's why we see the rise of these sort of strong men, like these, I mean, they're not necessarily all dictators. They're not necessarily all autocrats. We can't use the same word, but one thing they really have in common is this use of masculinity as a flashpoint.
I'm really interested by the Gilded Age. This is a Gilded Age sort of phenomenon. So like looking back, and Hawley tries to bring in the Teddy Roosevelt legacy, and you look at all the different things that were going on. You had the suffragettes. You have I mean, a whole bunch of stuff, like the Oscar Wilde stuff going on in England at the time. Like this crisis. Like talk about I guess like maybe you've touched on it a little bit, but it does seem like a crisis that is really big in a Gilded Age. And last time we reacted in the way that it cemented all these things. This is we went socially backwards in a response to it, and now we're kind of undoing the previous Gilded Age's masculinity crisis response.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that one of the issues was at that time the transition from an agrarian society to a more urbanized one was really causing a widespread crisis. I mean, not in the sense that of, well, what are men supposed to be doing?
Right.
Like if the role of men was to work the land, and now they're going to cities, and everyone's job is kind of more similar. It's like there are less prescribed gender roles. Like women are going to work also. And And a sort of a sense that as a society, like we're kind of like losing something in that process, and and for Roosevelt, it was he was really able to mobilize those anxieties to tell a story that about what we needed to do about national purpose. His idea of national purpose was horrifying. I mean, it was like, imperialism and conquest, like let's go kill lots of people in the Philippines, and indigenous people here in the United States. I mean, just sort of like expansionism and and a real a very racist and violent vision of how American men were going to be redeemed, and so I think that we're in a sort of a similar moment now, where there's a lot of anxiety about men's changing role and and changing place in the culture, and in the economy and in their families, and Hawley is really mobilizing that again toward a very right wing and racist vision of what of what our society should be. Interestingly, Hawley's own book about Teddy Roosevelt is fascinating, because he wrote this. He published it way back in 2008, before he was a right-wing politician, and he's very critical. He's critical of. He basically calls Roosevelt a white supremacist, and he's very critical of that. It's like
part of the woke mob coming for Teddy.
Yeah. It's so interesting, and also criticizes the idea that masculinity should be achieved through violence. And this is somebody who flash forward and he's giving the January 6th guys a thumbs up. A lot has changed. I mean, and so it is sort of really interesting to me that somebody wrote this very thoughtful and critical biography, and he's in effect becoming the very thing that he critiqued.
Yeah, actually, he figured out that that works. Like, something about this. Maybe I should just do that. It's like Tucker Carlson. There's a clip in like 2001 where he's criticizing Bill O'Reilly, saying he's not the like guy that you think he is, the log cabin sort of guy. And then later he's just like, actually, he's not that, but I'm not that either, and that actually pays really well. Anyway.
That's right.
Let's introduce this Hawley clip, because it's worth hearing him in his own words. The framing is fascinating, and like,
the editing is also fascinating.
Yeah. I will play this.
Senator, you gave a pretty hot speech at the National Conservatism Conference in Orlando. You talked about the left's attack on men of America.
Yeah.
Why masculinity as your new big issue?
Well, I think what the left is doing is attacking America. They're saying that America is systemically oppressive and men are systemically responsible.
What's a man to you? Paint a picture.
What's a man? Well, a man is a father, a man is a husband, a man is somebody who takes responsibility. As conservatives, we've got to call men back to responsibility. We've got to say that spending your time not working, and we have more and more men who are not working, spending your time on video games, spending your time watching porn online while doing nothing, is not good for you, your family, or this country.
So a viewer's watching this and they're thinking, really? What the liberals are doing are going to push me to watch Pornhub more or play Donkey Kong more? Do you mean that literally?
Well, what I mean literally is that I think the liberal attack, the left-wing attack on manhood says to men, you're part of the problem. It says that your masculinity is inherently problematic. It's inherently oppressive.
What's your basis for linking that to what liberals or the left, as you would say, do? Is that based on data or based on a hunch?
Well, it's policy over many years. I mean, if you look at the policy of deindustrialization, those are policy choices Mike pursued over many years.
Wait, how does that connect to porn?
Oh, well, you've got men, 16 million men, Mike, who are idle, who don't have anything to do. Now, partly that's their own responsibility, but also partly it's because jobs have dried up in many cities across America and rural areas too. I think you put together lack of jobs, you put together fatherlessness, you put together the social messages that we teach our kids in school. I think we've got to confront that and its effects.
Yeah, so I mean, Josh Hawley is obviously, extremely right wing, if not a fascist. I mean, I think he is basically like he has fascistic politics, but he's, the interviewer is being sort of willfully obtuse there, and Hawley is giving him a materialist analysis of what's going on. Like he's saying, look, if people don't have jobs, people are not making a good living. He wants to just blame them because he's conservative, but he knows,
Yeah.
Because
that's a funny catch when he says that, though, about it being their responsibility, but also,
it's their fault, because that's what we have to say. We're right wingers, but he's actually a serious person. He's studied history. He knows there's a material reason for this, and that's and he's saying it. It's a very interesting moment.
The thing where he says like it's inherently bad. It's very similar to the critical race theory of saying white people are inherently are racist, right? And that's sort of like you're bad. They're saying you're bad. It's basically that's the fundamental message.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And the thing is, I mean, it's so easy to laugh at it, because it is really, I mean, it is funny, like, of course, like that, and the thing about the thing about, watching porn and playing video games all day. But there is, I mean, like there is a sense that men are adrift, and when he says liberals are telling men that they're the problem, I think he's not wrong about that.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of leads us into this next bit, which I think is really important. I think there's two sides of it. There's like talking about like men as in like older men, and then like, young guys as they're sort of getting into like manhood or, adulthood, however you want to phrase it. But maybe just starting on like the men who are not taking responsibility, right? According to Hawley, the people who aren't working, the people who are idle. I do think one thing that's like, it is really notable though, that like what's frightening to me about this whole movement on the right wing is that they point to something that a lot of people can sort of recognize and feel, right? Which is that, the world sort of does seem out of whack, right? It doesn't seem like it's that easy to sort of work the kind of traditional jobs that you could find and, and raise a family on. There's a lot of anxiety that goes along with that. And also, and I want to ask, make this as broad as possible to hear your opinion on this, because we want to talk basically why the left has such a hard time talking about it. But I want to note just one thing on like what Hawley's talking about is idleness and all of these, kind of feelings of anxiety that, men have, or just people have, frankly, is something that I think some leftists, especially like people in our camp, the socialist camp, has with like work and like self-value, right? I'm all about reducing the working hours as much as possible. But, a lot of people do get value from feeling that they're contributing to society. And I don't know, like, I don't feel, what worries me about him is like, he can point out some of these problems and then we can laugh at him because his solutions are basically be responsible. But I don't feel like we are articulating a great message as to how to address the fundamental problem, or one that's attractive, frankly.
No, that's exactly right. And that's what really scared me about it, was that that he is identifying something that is real, and like middle-aged mothers do not want to see their sons playing video games and watching porn all day, and somebody who's saying, look, this isn't how it should be, and your sons should have a sense of purpose, is going to be a lot more appealing than a bunch of elite liberals who are laughing and saying like, oh no, like watching porn is not a problem. I'm not saying that watching porn is terrible, but in excess, I mean, like, mothers raising sons, know that if they're doing that too much, there's something wrong.
It's clearly a symptom of society not unable to produce meaning for folks.
Yeah.
I'm curious your perspective on this porn issue, though, because Holly brought it up. Steven Crowder's show today is about how Billie Eilish is finally right about something, and she's saying about how she watched too much porn when she was younger. And I'm curious, like, the porn issue seems to be one that they think that they can really speak to people on. I'm just curious because it seems that seems a little bit counterintuitive from them as like the free speech warriors, don't censor us sort of thing. Like I'm curious what your take on that is.
I mean, if they lean on that too heavily, it's going to blow up in their face because Americans like their liberties. But as one example of many, which is really the way that Holly is approaching it, to be honest. I mean, as one example among many of how many men are socially maladjusted, I think it's going to resonate. Right. That it's just like not proposing to take it away, not saying that it's the root of all evil. But just like video games, like if you're doing that too much, it's because you don't have enough to do.
Right, or drugs, for often in that case too.
Yeah, and I think also that it's kind of it's an interesting thing for Holly to bring up in a way because it sort of taps into the like. It's like if men are watching porn all day, there's something missing from their real lives. Like and that's true of it's true of video games too, but the porn is kind of a deeper critique because in some ways because it's like, oh, what's actually missing from their real lives is like an actual sexuality. Like and that's like something that people like in their heart of hearts know is important. Like that people know that it's important to be out in the world having real relationships, and there's something that is disturbing about the extent to which like young men might be struggling with that.
Yeah. I mean, and because I want to make sure that we're saving some time in the last half to sort of talk about our side, because I think that's where like the value of this conversation can really be, so we can change, build a better movement. But to sort of maybe carry us there, when we're talking about Hallie and these kind of, I don't know, paragons of like right-wing masculinity or whatever, could you just sort of help people who might not be really familiar with the difference between these two ideas, understand the kind of difference between like a liberal feminist response? Like in the beginning of your New York Times piece, you notice like the kind of like, snickering and laughing and dunking that's coming from, more like liberal feminist circles versus a socialist feminist circle, though I must say is not immune to wanting to dunk on these guys too, because they're very goofy. But could you sort of help us ideologically understand the difference between those two school of thoughts and how it applies here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's absolutely at the heart of my reaction to this. I mean, I think that the whole episode somewhat illustrates how liberal feminism just doesn't really have anything to offer men, and it's I mean, if you think about it, like it's nice that lots of men do subscribe to liberal feminism, because they're good, decent people, and they think that everyone should have human rights. But if you think about it, the message, you are going to lose privilege in your home and in the labor market, and like everything about you is under question and suspicion, and then what do you get back from that? And liberalism doesn't really have any answer to the what do you get back in return, because liberalism views the world and the economy as a zero-sum game. So for liberal feminism, the problem is there's a scarcity of goods, there's a scarcity of opportunity, there's a scarcity of jobs, and only a certain number of people can be in the 1% or even the 10%. And the problem for liberal feminism is that women are disadvantaged in that rat race. So by definition, helping women to advance is going to push men out. That's just how it works, because you are looking at something that is a zero-sum game, because liberal feminism accepts capitalism exactly as it is. So what would men get out of that? I mean, there's it's nice that some men are willing to subscribe to liberal feminism. I don't want to discourage them, but it helps. But when we look at it that way, it helps to understand why so many would not, or why so many men might be hostile to that vision. And on the other hand, socialist feminism says, we're comrades in struggle. We are all fighting for a different arrangement, one in which we could all thrive and prosper, one in which we don't accept the scarcity. We don't accept a scarcity. We don't accept a class society in which everything good is hoarded by a few. We want to redistribute that for the many, to enjoy and to feast upon. So that's and within that, we need to look at making sure that women are treated as human beings, and that all the social reproduction does not fall on us to perform. That we're making our new societal arrangements in a way that are gender equal and humane, and that we're rethinking everything about our labor, but we're rethinking that with the goal of a society where all can thrive and prosper. And I think that's really different. I think socialist feminism has a lot more to offer men, and we don't really come out and say that because. Honestly, I'm not sure why, but I think there's such a hegemony around liberal feminism that it almost makes it hard to articulate why socialist feminism is better for men. But I think it is, and I think that in the scheme of things, that's one of many reasons why socialist feminism is more promising. It's
and also more threatening,
and more threatening. Exactly, and which is why they always have to try to make us go away.
Well, I mean, because I just wanted to note that, a part of this, at least from people I see around me, I think that socialist feminism not only is true, it's much more radical, and it actually does want to hit at the heart of a lot of these kind of gender-based inequities and patriarchy, versus a kind of more liberal feminism, which just wants to give the keys to a few more folks, right? Which again is more just than a completely exclusive boys club or what you know what I mean? It's far and away less so than emancipation, for the vast majority of people. Yeah, and I agree with you too. I mean, and this gets to this last bit. I mean, dealing with this crisis of masculinity. I mean, not to talk too much about myself, but I grew up with a single mother without a father. And one thing that worries me about these kind of right-wing characters is I see it happening in my community, younger guys that I know, because I grew up not only with just a single mother, but also in the queer community in the South, right? So I was in between two worlds. One's kind of very radical left-wing, and then more conservative kind of thing, right? And I was in between both of those because I was a guy who played sports. I like country music. It's like I fit in with a lot of folks, but at home I was getting something very different, and trying to figure out how what being a man was to me was a personal journey, and luckily I had a lot of folks to sort of help me out with that. But I see other people who sort of might come in from a situation where like they don't, for example, have a father figure, and they start looking for these people. And the right wing, I just find they're always there waiting to sort of answer those kind of questions, and I don't see that same kind of interest on the left, and I think it's because there's people are very uncomfortable sort of I don't know, I mean sort of, I don't know, holding up that kind of space. I mean, a very specific example is like, you have to learn how to shave your face when you get to a certain age. Being a young guy on the internet, I go and I type in how to shave my face, and I went on this website, didn't think too much about it, but a few years ago I went and looked it up, right, what it was, and it was crazy town, far right, men's rights stuff, but they're waiting there for us. And I don't see us doing that enough on the left.
No,
taking those demands seriously.
No, that's absolutely right, and all that right wing YouTube stuff is really. I mean, like I have a son, and he is really into sports, and they like all those YouTube algorithms like will steer him to really right wing content, because they're just like, like you seem to be a white guy who watches a lot of hockey clips. Let us show you. Why vaccines are gonna like castrate you or whatever.
Yeah.
It's bad.
And I mean, I think so. There's the macro kind of political point, and I think the first one is that like to sort of, I mean, because if we focus on this as like a question of masculinity, what Hallie is doing, right? I think it can be a bit of a mistake, right? Because what Hallie is sort of, he's speaking to like a general like anxiety amongst like working class people, right? And I think gendering that too much, you can get into tricky territory. But the answer to Hallie is to be the ones who like, we own the space of coming up with solutions to deindustrialization so much that Hallie's saying, yeah, it's pornography, and all these other things just seems as absurd as it is. I think the absence from that conversation politically is something that's really hurting us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it was interesting that, I mean, when Trump was running in 2016, he emphasized that deindustrialization stuff so much. It was one of the reasons. It was definitely one of the reasons he won. And I think that people forget that. That like that a lot of the time he was actually talking about these economic issues as they hit men, especially, and he wasn't just fulminating about the wall, although he was certainly doing that as well. But yeah, I think that we on the left can do a much better job. For one issue is I think we can probably be a little more subtle in how we talk about it. That there is that there is sort of this this tendency at misandry where you're just like where men are supposed to sort of like disappear in liberal politics. And also I think a sense that of being under suspicion, where like it sometimes seems as if every liberal politician is always being accused of something, and that there's that there's kind of an atmosphere in which from the liberal side, men seem to be under suspicion. And of course, some of that is very valid reckoning with, a history of sexual violence and sexism. But some of it is like an overheated atmosphere that I think isn't coming off very well, isn't projecting very well into the larger culture. And yeah, and but I also think in a larger sense, like we need to be talking a lot more about the real solutions to the real material problems that Holly is exploiting. I mean, and some of that is, you know, stuff that the left is already doing, but our rhetoric and storytelling needs to be a little bit more inclusive about who benefits. Like, you know, so, you know, the Green New Deal obviously would really help men. We should not let them cast it as like some kind of like plot to take away your hamburgers and your and your SUVs. It's like you know, that like this is like definitely a policy which men would concretely benefit from, and we need to kind of take back the cultural signifying around that, so that it's not so feminized, and like, and I mean, and then I mean, just sort of as a small example, I mean, this is more on the mainstream Democrat side, but no, it really actually isn't. It was really it was really the sort of left Democrat side as well. I mean, as Biden was rolling out this infrastructure bill, this is another example. I mean, you'd think, okay, this is really great because infrastructure is, you know, offers both a national sense of purpose in the sort of Teddy Roosevelt framing, and also, you know, traditionally masculine jobs, which obviously women would benefit from too, but it can certainly be understood as something beneficial to men, and the criticisms from the left side of the Democratic Party, you know, even, you know, people we normally love, like the Squad and Jamal Bowman and, you know, people like that, the criticisms were, you know, this, and from within the White House as well. You know, there was a lot of this discussion from within the White House that infrastructure is for white men, and you know, and so like, again, as if that was a bad thing. Like,
tell my neighbor that, man. Like, I live like back in my neighborhood, which is like a working class, like person of color neighborhood, and like my neighbor is this amazing guy who spent his entire working career building, you know, highways across the country. Right? I don't know. It is funny to hear it. It's just like, oh, it's white guys only. I don't know if you've ever been on a construction site in your life in the first place.
It's so absurd. I mean, it's so absurd. There's nothing at all white about these jobs. And
it was. Can I just jump in? It was never the case. Like, there's a bridge that crosses the Yellowstone, and it was made by a company from like Birmingham in like the 20s or something like that, right? Like, and it was because it was black labor was very cheap at that time, and so they were going across the country making bridges. So,
but there's an anxiety about like universalism, that everything has to be like particular, right? To like make it have value, and I think that's a real problem that the left is having, and I think so we've imported more from liberalism than traditional socialist politics, but it's a big problem still.
It is a big problem, and I mean, yeah, and obviously, like, the loss of manufacturing has been devastating to communities of color. Like, even you know, this is like, I mean, this is definitely not a white male problem, but at the same time, what is so bad about some white men benefiting from this? You know, it's like, I mean, it's like, we the left, like, we need them as voters, we need them as part of our movement. Like the idea that, you know, as soon as something might help men out, we have to you know, complicate it and critique it. I think is it is part of how we're getting, you know, our own way on this. And so then people had to kind of then the sort of left side of the Democrats had to reframe this. So care work is infrastructure. It's like, well, how about care work is care work and also really important? You know, well, we could just let infrastructure sound like what it is, and let some men think they might be getting something out of it, and that wouldn't be so terrible.
I 100% agree on that. I mean, just while we have you here, because it's an example I want to sort of hear your thoughts on. I mean, this is not a super concrete point, but it is something that I kick around, right? You know, again, growing up in the South, like there's all these kind of like one thing that sort of frustrated me when I became a leftist, because I was conservative for most of my younger life, and I became a leftist as I got older. I became a leftist when I started working. You know, I did my first construction job, like really opened up some doors for me. And look, this might be a personal thing. I don't think this needs to be the number one focus of what we're doing, but like, I think we need to sort of be a little bit more comfortable on the left, like with excellence. And what I mean by that is there's a kind of tendency to fear that, in the sense of like, I don't know, like we focus a lot on like really big systems that are like keeping people down. But also like, I think we also need to, in addition to being able to talk about those big systems, being able to celebrate the folks and the classes and the movements that fight back against it. Like, I think of somebody like, you know, Hallie, like, you know, is talking about Roosevelt or whoever. I think about somebody who's way more impressive and is certainly on the leftist side. It's like Paul Robeson, right? Like Paul Robeson, just like incredible athlete, scholar, thinker, you know, political activist, who certainly was not, and I think it's a different, like, I don't know if I would necessarily want to gender this and call it a left-wing masculinity, but it's a kind of value that I think we could be celebrating more, because it's like Paul Robeson was somebody, and for people who aren't familiar, you know, he was like the first black man to play Othello. He was a, you know, incredible running back at Rutgers. He was a lawyer. He was an incredible actor, baritone singer, and he fought against Jim Crow, like, you know, pre like the massive civil rights movement. He was a communist. He, you know, was incredibly articulate and passionate against the fight of imperialism. And he gets brought up in front of the House of Un-American Activities, and he gives the most defiant speech at a time when people in this country, black people in this country, you know, really, really were completely unsafe to be, you know, showing political opinions and fervor like that. Anyways, the point about Robeson is like, this is somebody who is like a great individual, but was always rooted in the collective too. Yeah. Right. And I just feel like we can try to build and articulate those kind of ideas and images for people, because that's very attractive. And I think that while for some people being able to talk about systemic stuff is very attractive, and I understand that, like it was, you know, important for me becoming a leftist, but I think it's also important for us to say, like, we have like we create a lot of greatness. The working class is great. These social struggles are great, and like we should be very comfortable sort of celebrating that too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. No, I think that's I think that's really right, and that you know, people need models of how to be. You know, like it's like if you look at you know, again, like if you look at little boys, like, you know, like as you know, I have been doing over the past 15 years of raising one. You know, it's like you look at how they look at coaches. You know, that like they will just like you know, some coach who's like, you know, gassing on with like all these like motivational like cliches or whatever. It's like, you know, they will just like listen raptly to that, because they are looking for examples of how to be, you know, like how, like, and that's and you know, I think that you're right, we do underestimate that, and it's sort of considered a little like cheesy on the left to have heroes and, you know, to look up to people, but it's really an important part of how we become, you know. And I think talk about for struggle too.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about Christopher Hitchens so much. Like both David and I came up on Hitchens, and it's like not the greatest example at all. But it's clear that like young men, they
love him, man. I mean, like
it's so true.
It feels like he was vaguely Marxist, right? Like he's more appealing, but young men, they do need that model to show like, oh, you can be sort of well read and interesting to listen to.
Yeah, no, that is a great example, because I think it's kind of funny how much men focus on Christopher Hitchens, because I knew him, and I obviously like admired his writing a lot despite the bad political turn that he took, but he's like, he didn't really contribute that much as an intellectual, and he didn't, you couldn't really in many ways say what his contribution was, but I think you're absolutely right that he provided an example of a way to be a leftist, and at a time where there were really not very many leftists, and a way to articulate, and a way to sort of be an atheist, at a time where where people were also really looking for that, but also to be like an alternative, a way to be a man. I think it is really interesting how much men do focus on him, but I think that it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, we need to just continue building the roster, basically, and there's plenty of people. Well, Liza, I really appreciate you joining us today, and people should definitely check out Liza's writing in The Nation and Jacobin and all of their work, frankly, anywhere you can find it. Thank you so much. Hope to be able to do it again sometime.
Thanks a lot. My pleasure.